Hey guys, welcome. This is Kim, and this is the Maguey mezcal presentation. Today we're just going to be briefly covering what mezcal is, a little bit about Trevor and I's trip to Oaxaca in 2018. We took with Maguey to go to a couple different of their palenques to see how mezcal was made, and also talking a little bit about the new upcoming flight we're going to have at Sage that features three Maguey mezcal expressions. Okay, what's mezcal? Mezcal is a distilled alcoholic beverage made from any agave plant. The word mezcal comes from a Nahuatl word, which means oven-cooked agave. Most of you know that mezcal's most distinct feature is the smokiness of it, and that does come from a process where they put the piñas in the horno and cook it before fermentation. Agave can be grown commercially or wild harvested. Generally, the wild harvested mezcals, you'll see wild in the name, like in Del Maguey's, it's wild jabalí or wild pelon. And they are a little bit harder to control, obviously, because they are wild harvested. They can be on the side of, a sheer hill or overgrown, and they are also a little bit harder to control the population and not wanting to harvest too much of it. So they're often small batch. And a little more rare. Del Maguey does try to do a good job of being sustainable with their agave and constantly replanting so that they're not just totally pillaging all of the agave. And Oaxaca and mezcal. So mezcal's made in 9 different states in Mexico, but pretty dominantly in Oaxaca. And I feel like one theme that you'll see throughout this presentation is how mezcal in these different regions really has been a family tradition, been passed down for hundreds of years. And that's how people form their different techniques. And that's a lot of the reasons the expressions differ is because of their techniques. So we'll be talking a lot about that. Okay, this picture on the left there is myself and Rogelio. He is the maestro for Tobola. And that little baseball that he has there is where he carries his tobola and he pours it out for people in their copitas, which is really fun. And this is at Santa Maria. And you can see the piñon hearts up on the top right there that have been harvested and cooked. And then on the bottom is the mill where they're actually extracting the juices. But I'll tell you a little more about that soon. So as we talked about, mezcal's made in palenques. The head distiller has lots of names, but is generally known as the maestro. And a lot of these places have been in this town for many years, or a staple of the community. Del Maguey has only one palenque per village. That's why they're called single village bottles. And that's mostly so they're not cannibalizing their own business within the same village. If you look to the top left there, that is Santa Maria, where that tobola I was talking about is made. And the bottom right is Santo Domingo Alvaradas. That one's obviously a little bit newer, has been built a little more recently. Okay, this is kind of the layout of most palenques. There's a horno, which is an oven, and the harvested piñas or agave hearts are tossed in there, covered up, and baked for a period of time. The next picture is the mill. That's where the agave hearts are chopped up and crushed. Tinus is basically a fermenter, an open-air fermenter where the agave hearts are tossed into with some water and they ferment in there. And after a few weeks of fermenting, they go into the still where they are double distilled. The setups and production teams at different palenques will obviously differ with size, but generally there's always just a maestro and then who's head of the operation. As you can see Rogelio here, it's an adorable picture of him. And then a couple team members, which is often family or other people from the village. A little about the process. So you first harvest the agave and when it's ready, and generally that's right before the agave flowers, which it will do once in its life before it dies, but that means that the most readily available sugars are present, and generally the agave hearts that they are harvesting are between 7 and 15 years. Some are a little older, some a little younger. But that's basically what it looks like with its leaves off there. Okay, there's around 200 types of agave plants. Approximately 30 are used in making mezcal. Blue Weber is definitely the one that you have heard of a lot because that is what tequila is made out of. Mezcal can be a bunch of different types. As you can see here in this picture, there are two different types of agave plants there. The tepestate on the left with the curlier leaves and the tobola there on the right. This is like a really great chart that I felt like helped me to understand mezcal. And so mezcal is actually a distinction under mezcal because mezcal is anything that is an agave plant. Any distilled beverage made from an agave plant. So tequila is actually under mezcal, as well as some of these other distinctions, but obviously the two most well-known are mezcal and tequila. You also have some things like pulque, which is just not distilled. It's made from agave plants as well, but it's not distilled, and sotol. But this gives you a general idea. And there's also a link there at the bottom that is a really great article that talks about each of these different types of beverages made from agave. I will also post that link at the bottom of this YouTube page because I'm not that tech savvy and I'm not sure if you can actually get there from this slide. Okay, this is pictures of different hornos, and it kind of depends on, again, their process, and some are baked for 5 days and or some even less, and some are up to 30 days. The top left is the Santa Maria, and that one is a 30-day roast, so they will roast those pinos in there for an entire month, basically. This is obviously where your mezcal gets its smoky flavor from, is all this time in the oven. Oh, and there you can see a little video of Trevor throwing some rocks out, trying to unbury the agave hearts, as the rest of us sit around and drink. Okay, these are a couple pictures of some agave hearts that have been roasted, and you can eat them after that. It's really sweet and sticky and delicious. So after the roast, piñas sit for a few days and start fermenting. As you can see here, it's not all that pretty, but it makes a delicious drink. And charred hearts, they're put in either the mill, as we saw before, which is crushed by a mule, a horse, or a man. And again, this just leads into like what their different process is. As you can see here, this is Minero, which is at Santa Catarina, and their process requires them doing it by hand. Whereas this is Chichicapa, and they have a mill and I believe a horse that goes around and crushes up those agave hearts. Here is the Santa Maria, and they have a mule there. And I think we have a video of Trevor with him. And so once the piñas are in the mill, they're crushed, and then as you can see, the gentleman there in the bottom frame, he is taking the different, like he's scraping the sides and juices and the fibers, and all that's collected, and then it is moved to the tinas, the open air fermenters, with a little water added. It's pretty thick, as you can see. There's a cross stuck in there, and it will ferment for about 14 to 30 days. It's open air fermentation, so it just gets these wild yeasts, and that's what ferments it. The yeast will obviously eat up the sugars from the agave hearts, and that's what makes it alcoholic. And they're also top fermenters, so as you can see here, there's like a pellicle or a protective crust on top of the fermenters after a few days. And then once fermentation is done, then it'll go into the still. This is at Minero, and this one is a clay still. Some people have clay stills, some people have coppers, again, going back to their tradition. Minero, I think, is a really cool example of you can really taste the difference in the clay still there, and like Monero to me is much more minerally than a lot of the other ones, especially the other two that we have on the flight. And here's two different types of stills, the clay and the copper. Oh yeah, and I just talk a little bit about the clay really coming through in the mezcal for Monero, as I was just speaking about. Okay, so this is just showing you part of the distillation process. I believe this one's at Santa Maria, and it is distilled twice. And they've just come up with this because the second distillation refines it, and but past that, they felt like they were losing flavor. Okay, this is a pretty cool process at Santa Maria with Rogelio, where he is using this method that's an ancient method to decide what the level of alcohol is. It's called Las Perlas. It's where he takes it up, and once it drops, he will take a look at the size of the bubbles there, and he'll be able to tell what percentage alcohol the mezcal is. And he's generally within 1% when they send it off to get lab tested, which is pretty amazing.
It will tell him the proof of the distance. ¿Cuántos grados?
Okay. So from here, once it's twice distilled, the product is collected, sometimes in cans like these, and then it goes to their bottling facility, Del Maguey's bottling facility in Teotihuacan. And here, still, the process is very hands-on, and as you can see, hand bottling, hand packaging. Even though this facility was not built that long ago, there's still a lot of love and care into each bottle. Here's a little bit more of the facility and some of their storage and beautiful views. Del Maguey translates to of the agave. It was founded by Ron Cooper, who was a famous artist in the 70s, and he founded Del Maguey in 95. He was going to Oaxaca a lot, really fell in love with mezcal, wanted to bring it to the United States, but basically said to the villages that he was choosing, or the producers he was choosing, like, I don't want to change anything about your process or your tradition. I really just want to be able to make a little more so we can bring it to the United States. Del Maguey has a big push for sustainability, replanting wild and propagated agave, and you might have heard some about tequila producers pillaging some of their agave and their potential shortages because of that, because these plants take so long to grow before they're ready to be harvested. Del Maguey has a big focus on their sustainability in general. And they really try hard to forge great relationships with their producers and the communities that they are going in and working with. As you can see, the little baskets down here that come with a lot of the bottles from Del Maguey. That was one program that they developed to kind of bring the women in the village into the process and to have them make a little money too, is making these really beautiful cases. And they do a lot of stuff like that. They do some scholarships. They have a lot of different scholarships for people in the villages or their kids in the villages. And help with, different specific needs. If a village needs help getting some water to their village or a mule, things like that. Also, I just really like this picture of Esperidian, the bottom there with his machete looking out over the mountain when we were hiking down to his palenque. Okay, so for our flight that we're going to have at Sage, so mezcal is traditionally drank out of a copita. And it's a little clay cup. You can see Trevor looking sassy there, drinking out of his. It's meant to be sipped straight, not particularly in a cocktail, even though it is delicious in lots of cocktails. And we wanted to focus on using the same plant and looking at different expressions of that same plant through the different traditions or equipment that these families are using to make them. So all the ones that we're going to be showcasing are coming from agave espadín. And so it's the flavor is strictly from those different processes. The three that we are going to be showcasing are Chichicapa, Minero, which is from Santa Catarina, and Santo Domingo Alvaradas. And this is us with those three different places we did visit and the producers there. These are just some tasting notes for you to take a look at to get to know the mezcals that we're going to be featuring. And Chichicapa is a lot of bartenders' favorites. Minero, again, I really like it because I feel like you can taste the minerality a lot more, and it's very different to me than the other ones, a little less smoky. And then the Santo Domingo Alvarados there. Okay, it's going to be 3 pours, and they are 1 ounce pours in these cubitas. And when we're also working with this charity called Puente, and $2 of each flight will go to that charity. And basically that charity is trying to focus on food sovereignty for villages in Oaxaca. And they do that through Amaranth, which is it's a gluten-free perennial grain. And it's basically trying to cultivate these crops for different pueblos or villages, and so that these people can have this crop to grow for themselves. It's a healthy crop, but also to be able to sell. Guys, that's it. Thank you so much for joining today. I hope you learned something. Please feel free to reach out to myself or Trevor if you have questions about the Del Maguey mezcal or mezcal in general. And yeah, I hope you learned a little and enjoyed it. And if not, then you got to see this adorable picture of goats that I took. And Stijibeu means to our health, to the health of the earth, and to Mother Nature, which is how we cheers to mezcal every time in Oaxaca. Thank you guys so much.